Good afternoon, everybody. This is a quick announcement about language services. Buenas tardes con todos. Para esta presentación se van a proveer los servicios de interpretación al español en simultáneo. Para acceder al canal de interpretación, en unos minutos usted observará en la barra de herramientas en la parte inferior de su pantalla el icono de un globo terráqueo. Al darle clic al globo terráqueo, usted va a poder seleccionar su idioma de preferencia. Gracias. Albert, I'm ready to be added as an interpreter.
Good afternoon. My name is Sean Gilbert, and on behalf of the Contra Costa County Library, the League of Women Voters Diablo Valley, the League of Women Voters West Contra Costa County, and Contra Costa County TV. Welcome to today's community conversation webinar, What is the Reality of Immigration? Before we begin, I would like to review a few housekeeping items. This is a Zoom webinar, so the audience microphones are muted and the videos are turned off. If you have any questions for the moderator or panelists, please submit them using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. A member of the team will share your questions with the moderator during the Q&A portion of this presentation. This webinar is being recorded and it will be posted later to the YouTube channels of the Contra Costa County Library and the League of Women Voters Diablo Valley. Site addresses to those YouTube channels will be displayed on the screen at the end of the program. Additionally, Contra Costa Television is broadcasting this webinar today and will rebroadcast the program. The dates and times will be posted on your screen at the end of the webinar as well. Contra Costa Television is available to watch on Comcast Channel 27, AT&T Uverse Channel 99, Astound Channel 32, and online at ContraCostaTV.org. The contact information for our panelists and the date and subject of our next community conversation will also be posted at the end of this program. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan grassroots organization working to protect and expand voting rights and ensure everyone is represented in our democracy. We empower voters and defend democracy through advocacy, education, and litigation at the local, state, and national levels. The League of Women Voters of the United States believes that democratic government depends upon informed and active participation at all levels of government. We invite you to join the League of Women Voters and support our work. You can join the League by visiting lwvc.org/join. The League Statement of Position on Immigration states, the League of Women Voters believes that immigration policies should promote reunification of immediate families, meet the economic, business, and employment needs of the United States, and be responsive to those facing political persecution or, humanitarian crises. Provision should also be made for qualified persons to enter the United States on student visas. All persons should receive fair treatment under the law. The League supports federal immigration law that provides an efficient, expeditious system with minimal or no backlogs for legal entry of immigrants into the United States. It is now my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Ali Saidi. For over 20 years, Ali Saidi has been using both litigation and policy advocacy to fight for community members dehumanized by our systems of mass incarceration and mass deportation. He specializes in anti-racist approach to the intersection between criminal law and immigration law. In 2016, he spearheaded an advocacy campaign which led to the creation of the county's Rapid Response and Immigration Legal Services program, Stand Together Contra Costa, of which he now serves as the director. In addition to his service at the Contra Costa County Public Defender's Office, Ali is a founding and active member of the Contra Costa Immigration Rights Alliance, where he serves on the Internal Coordination Committee. Ali is also a founding member of the Contra Costa County Reimagine Public Safety Campaign. Ali, thank you.
Thank you so much, Sean. I'm so excited about this conversation because as you know, and you see every day in the news, issues of immigration are really top headlines these days, and there's a lot of layers to it, and there's a lot of politicization of what's going on today. You know, you see the news of you know, migrants seeking safety being bused to New York, and what's going on with that. We see, you know, regardless, this isn't a partisan issue, I want to note as well, regardless of, you know, what party is in the federal administration, we have serious issues with access to due process, access to humanitarian relief, and access to rights for immigrants coming to this country. And in California, we really are a leader nationally and internationally in seeing what the future can look like when you have a multicultural economy and society that has immigrants as a really critical part. And I think that what this conversation is about co-creating the future of America, frankly, and what role all of us have to play, including immigrants, in a more just future. We have such a great panel for you all today. I couldn't be more thrilled. These are folks that I've known for a long time and whose passion, commitment, and dedication have all taught me so much about what we need to do to move forward in community and really come up with proactive issues. You know, these are really personal issues as well. And so we're going to start today with having folks share a little bit about what activated them to this work. And I'll start with myself before I introduce the other panelists. So I myself am an immigrant. I was born in Iran. I'm an Iranian American. And I came to this country like many people, like many migrants that are coming now, due to sociopolitical factors that made it necessary for my family and for my family's safety to leave. And we were fortunate enough to get out during the Iranian Revolution, and we settled in Southern California. And so I had this really personal experience as an immigrant who comes as a young immigrant to the country, of being kind of traumatized by the rapid move and the total change, but then having to adapt to the systems of belonging and othering that really make up what it is like to be an immigrant in this country. So I grew up in Southern California. I went to a very diverse neighborhood that had other folks that were also dealing with trauma, both trauma from many immigrants from the countries that they came, but also from trauma through lived experience in the United States. And so what was important to me as someone that always wanted to kind of belong and find what, you know, without a country that to call your own, what does it mean to be here? What does it mean to be part of America and be part of the American dream? And to me, it really comes down to belonging and community and working with others to do good work and really take accountability and responsibility for the society in which we live and everyone in our community, especially those that are most marginalized and most kept out of power. And that's the way that I've taken the approach to belonging. And these other three individuals that are with me on this panel today are my family, they are my community, they are what makes me feel like I belong. And I think the key to these really difficult issues is combating what is the the most dangerous part of the immigration debate is that people are coming to it from a place of cynicism, and there's a lot of alienation, especially as an immigrant, you feel alienated. And there's a lot of cynicism with how broken the system might be. But the way to combat cynicism and alienation is not to double down on it, but the antidote to cynicism is positive hard work and positive action. And the antidote to alienation is community. And so I am so proud to introduce you to the fellow panelists here, starting with Sandy Valenciano. Sandy is so incredible. I met Sandy years ago when we were actually starting the the Contra Costa Immigrant Rights Alliance. And Sandy and I go way, way back. But I'll let her share some stories. But before we do that, I do want to note that Sandy is just an amazing advocate. And you can check out her bio in the materials, but I think it's more powerful to really allow Sandy to share, like I did, what brought her to the work. In my case, it was my own immigrant experience and then politicization that came out of the hostage crisis and then the first Gulf War, the racism that I experienced, the exclusion that I experienced, the lack of belonging. And I decided that I needed to really address those issues. And so Sandy, for you, what brought you into this work?
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you so much for having me again. So great to share space with Deb and Yoel and Ali. So yeah, I was raised in Contra Costa at, I went to school at Antioch High School, and I came into this work being part of the Undocumented Youth Movement. When I was in high school, looking at opportunities to go to college, I had many of my college counselors tell me that they really didn't know what to do with me because they actually weren't exposed to a lot of undocumented youth at that time, or so I thought. And so I had many of my college counselors tell me that they really didn't know what would be of me, how they could help me, because at that point, there wasn't any services for undocumented youth in the ways that they exist now. And I didn't really want to settle for that answer. And I think it was me trying to prove them wrong that really ignited me to try to think about what does it look like for me to navigate seeking higher education on my own. And so that led me to my journey of going to Sonoma State University, where, I had to struggle a lot with being a full-time worker and also being a full-time student because I didn't have a choice. There was no way for me to be able to pay for my tuition. And in that experience, I learned a lot. I work with young people now still. And one of the things that I always tell young people is when you're young and you experience oppression, it kind of feels like bad luck. It kind of feels like, why are bad things always happening to me? Why isn't things going my way? And that was very much my experience being an undocumented young person in Antioch in Contra Costa County, was that I just always felt like we were in situations where it didn't feel like it was our fault. And unfortunately, we got the short end of the stick all the time. My parents are undocumented. My older sister's undocumented. And so we very much had an undocumented migrant experience living in Contra Costa. My parents are still there now. And, I always think about how I wish there would have been someone there for me who could have empowered me in my vision. And so, that's why I'm very connected to this work. I was a youth organizer. I started organizing when I was 18 years old. and I am 30 now. So I've been organizing for the past 12 years, and I am so lucky that I get to work with young people in my current capacity, and I get to be that person that I wish I had when I was younger. I'm very, I started off with this work, obviously trying to organize to have more opportunities for undocumented youth, but that led me to much bigger issues and a much bigger fight that I'm so lucky that I got to be part of with my colleague Deb Lee, who I've been doing this work alongside for so long, and Yoel and Ali, and just having the opportunity to be able to curate spaces that make people feel like they belong in their community. And so, yeah, that's what brings me to this space. And thank you again for having me.
Thank you, Sandy. Sandy taught me so much about organizing, and Sandy is really, I didn't go through her very impressive bio, but Sandy is at the middle of so many of the things that make California and the Bay Area leaders in really having a immigrant centered, human-centered, compassion-centered approach to making the changes we got to do. And Sandy is somebody that just gets it done. She is relentless, and I'm just so glad that you're here, Sandy. So I think next we'll go to Reverend Deborah Lee. Reverend Lee has worked at the intersection of faith and social justice for over 30 years in popular education, community organizing, and advocacy concerning issues of race, gender, economic justice, anti-militarism, LGBTQ inclusion, and immigrant rights, because all of those things are connected. She has consistently sought to strengthen the voice and the role of faith communities in today's social movements. And she works with the Interfaith Movement for Human Integrity and has helped build a network of 250 congregations, 2,000 faith leaders, and 250 community partners committed to immigrant justice and ending mass incarceration. Reverend Deborah Lee is a true leader and a champion, and a person I'm really grateful and honored to call a friend. You can look at the rest of her bio and the materials. But Reverend Lee, what brought you to the work? What brings you to this love work that we do?
Thank you for the introduction, Ali and Sandy. I can't believe Sandy's only 30. She has done so much. And it's been, you two in Contra Costa have been amazing, because you've really centered a lot of your work in Contra Costa County. And I've worked with faith communities in Contra Costa County, so I know how important it is, some of the institutional infrastructure that you've helped to build there. So just a little bit about what brings me to this work. I think certainly it begins with a bit of my own family history. I had the lucky roll of the dice to be born in this country. So I am a citizen of this country, and was born in the state of Ohio, where my parents immigrated separately from two different Asian countries. My mother immigrated from Indonesia in the height of a political turmoil and a coup. So she came to the United States for safety, as many people still come to this country today. My father came, they didn't know each other. So my father came from a different country, from Hong Kong. He was the oldest male in his family, and to support his mother and his brothers and sisters, he came to this country to work. And so they met in the state of Ohio, and that's where I was born and spent the first 18 years of my life. And so I consider myself in some ways a refugee from Ohio to California. And some of you may know what I'm talking about. So especially if you're Asian American. So certainly some of my thinking about immigration comes from that background, but also an awareness that none of that would have been possible had it not been for changes in immigration laws that took place in the 1960s. That part of the civil rights movement that was calling for racial equality, that allowed for some changes to happen, where my parents could even come for those reasons. So I am really indebted and grateful to that. So part of that centers, part of my commitment to this centers on that. And also, upon arriving in California and really understanding the history of California, how much of, when we talk about immigration, how much is laid upon this foundation of immigration policy and vitriol that was against Chinese Americans and Asian Americans over 100 years ago. So some of our very first immigration laws and our very first immigration detention center at Angel Island here to enforce the Chinese exclusion laws. So that, kind of binds me to this work as well. And then I think, on a very, in a more immediate way, I am a pastor, and I began this work in youth ministry and worked with many youth. And it was through actually youth ministry that I was hearing story after story about how young people's lives were being turned upside down by immigration policy. One young boy, his mother was deported on Christmas Day. Another young woman who, like Sandy, was an undocumented young adult who had a dream of being a doctor. She ended up self-deporting because she'd already gotten 4 AA degrees and thought, I'm never going to be able to become a doctor. She waited for President Obama to be elected in 2008, and 1 year, 2 year, 3, nothing changed. And so she ended up self-deporting. Her family's still here, but she's in another country that she left when she was 2 years old. So I've seen, and I wasn't even primarily working with Latino youth. I was working with all kinds of youth, but I could see that the ways that immigration policy was affecting young people's lives. So I realized at that moment that immigration justice is really one of the key civil rights issues of our day. And this was something that I had to be a part of. And as a person of faith, this is a calling for many of our faith traditions around how we welcome the stranger, how we walk with the newcomer, how we don't see national identity in that way, but we really see the humanity of all people across borders. And so that's been some of my commitment. Some of my work in Contra Costa County has been with working with congregations there who were helping to really save lives and accompany immigrants who are detained at the West County Detention Facility, to help immigrants who are starting their lives over upon release, or newcomer families, asylum seekers, but really trying to create a network of support that our government does not have for them, and to fill that gap. So I'll share more about that later.
Thank you, Reverend Lee. Amazing stuff. And you can see what brings us all to this work, and how important the values that we bring to it and community and communication is. And that's why we're so grateful to be able to share this space with all of you in the audience as well. Next up is Yoel Haile. Yoel is an organizer and advocate who has worked on immigrant rights, criminal justice, and education equity for over a decade. Yoel works to support Eritrean refugees and asylum seekers resettle in the U.S. in the U.S. That's in his spare time. In his day job, Yoel is the director of the Criminal Justice Program at the ACLU of Northern California, working to end mass incarceration and police violence. We're so pleased to have you here, Yoel. And these issues facing immigrants, as we'll talk about more, are completely intersectional. It's not just about immigration law or immigration policy. It's about how we treat each other and the systems that we create as a society to help everybody thrive. Yoel, welcome. What brought you into this work?
Thank you, everyone. And my apologies that I'm on my phone. I'm trying to switch to my laptop, and I'm on the other side of the world where it's 2:30 a.m. my time. But my name is Yoel. I am from Eritrea. I came to the US when I was a little bit over 15 years old as an immigrant. And my father had sought political asylum there, and we followed him. And that's how we arrived to the States. And as a result of that experience, so much of the work we've done has been, all of it really has been about immigration, about figuring out how do you apply for a green card, what's the process for citizenship when people come, like what's their asylum process like, what do they need, what did we need to get our papers right, and so. Because it's part of just your everyday life, you have to know how a lot of these processes work, which most of them are terrible, very time-consuming, uncooperative federal agencies. But all in all, that's how my involvement in the immigration space started. And I just remembered, as Sandy was talking, that Sandy and I met back in like 2015 or something in the basement of like the city of Berkeley, because we were trying to get them to divest from these private prisons that were being used both to incarcerate people and as detention immigrants at like 8 p.m. at night in the most obscure place in Berkeley. But yeah, that's and then I remember to the point also Sandy was making about her involvement during college and organizing. I went to college at a time when there was like mass student uprising and movements around tuition increases, around like education accessibility for those of us who were low income and were on like financial aid on school, people who are undocumented and who couldn't get any grants or financial aid. And my closest friends and people I organized with the most during those times were people from students who are undocumented, and we were all trying to fight for the same goal of trying to make education a reality for everyone. And I think because of our related immigration experiences, we bonded over our like shared struggles and kind of shared objectives. But that's how I came into this work, and now I've stayed in this work.
Thank you, Yoel. We are so grateful for the partnership. Yoel is one of the best guys I know, just such a force. So now we're going to kind of switch it up and go into more of a conversational kind of roundtable, the view kind of situation. And so anybody feel free to jump in as we're discussing things. But, some of the things that, the themes that have come up a little bit, Reverend Lee and Sandy, we're both talking about, and myself, we're talking about issues of criminalization and detention, and kind of what is the relationship between a lot of the narratives that we hear coming out of the immigration debate and like detention and criminalization and stuff. So I don't know if, Sandy, for example, I know you've done a lot of this work and had a lot of personal experience with this stuff. Are there any stories or anything that you want to kind of share with us in the audience that can kind of shed light on the reality of what these systems look like, particularly the pipelining to deportation and the detention systems themselves?
Yeah, thanks, Ollie. I'm also just realizing that there's a former high school teacher that's here, and I'm having this moment because I think when I think about like why we do this work, it's about, as I mentioned, like really trying to create a space of belonging for people. And I think there are structures that make it so that folks don't feel like they belong here. And ultimately, whether it's create the conditions that force people to self-deport, or create the conditions that narrow people's opportunities from the options and the choices that they can make, which allows them, or if not pushes them, to interacting with the criminal legal system, and then therefore the deportation system. I mentioned, I grew up in Antioch, and during the time that I grew up in Antioch, I felt like there was a lot of policing happening. I remember my experiences of immigration being spotted, and we wouldn't leave our house for a long period of time because that was a real fear. And we knew people who were being impacted by immigration enforcement locally. My experiences more directly is, I have my father, he's an Afro-Latino, and so he appears as a Black man. And I remember growing up, and my father would consistently get pulled over by the police. And during that time, undocumented folks did not have access to licenses. And so what would happen is that every vehicle that my family had, it would get confiscated by the police. And we were once again unable to have a vehicle to be able to get my father to work, to get me to school. And so I grew up what I felt was like always being surveilled by the police, because that was the experiences of my dad. And I grew up also experiencing my mother and my father being in arguments, because my mother, she's a much more fair complexion. And she would say, why does this always happen to you? And I would experience even that tension between my own parents, my mother not fully grasping that my dad was appearing as a Black man to law enforcement. And another experience that has impacted my family is, you know, I have family all over the state of California. Most of my family is actually in Fresno County, and my parents and I, we stayed in Antioch, Contra Costa. But not too long ago, I had a cousin who was struggling with substance use, and he was sentenced to a substance abuse facility, a rehabilitation home. But because there wasn't enough beds, enough space at this rehabilitation home, he was forced to stay at the local county jail in Fresno. And now Fresno actually has an office where ICE is able to come in and out. They basically have a desk at the jail. So unfortunately, what ended up happening was, because my cousin could not get a spot at the local rehabilitation home, he was then put into ICE custody, was detained at Adelanto Detention Center, and was unfortunately then deported. So when we think about like who are immigrant communities, what are migrant experiences, there's just so much nuances to who we are, the experiences that we hold, the racism, the discrimination. And when I think about you know, what are the conditions that our communities are experiencing, especially as we're trying to come out of COVID, it's just all, you know, how do we figure out understanding that people know that not just migrant communities, but poor working class folks are always constantly a paycheck away from not being able to make their rent. We're not being able to make our rent in the Bay is a situation away from losing housing. Losing housing is, you know, a situation away from being houseless, and that so forth, you know, running into situations where, you know, sometimes, you know, the option is doing an action that puts us closer into contact with the criminal legal system. And, you know, then there's the pipeline to detention and deportation. So I think people think that there is this good and this bad immigrant narrative, when really there's not, because we're all a situation away from ending up in the criminal legal system. And unfortunately for undocumented non-citizen folks, we're a situation away from being put into detention and deportation. And so that's the really bigger picture that I think we need to grapple with, is that the conditions are forcing people into situations that is placing people in these pipelines. And I think that's what we need to come to terms with.
Yeah, I think that's, first of all, thank you for sharing all of that. And I think that gives the, you know, at the end of the day, the reason we all do what we do is because of people, of human beings, is because we see day to day how these systems operate. And that's one of the things that we wanted to get across to everybody, is just come see for yourselves. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But on that issue of kind of like belonging and exclusion and kind of good immigrant, bad immigrant, you know, what kind of migration is okay, and what, in terms of like the political powers that be, and what kind of migration is looked down upon, and how does that map onto things like the socio-political realities of the world, as well as the realities of race and racism in America. I think those are really interesting issues. Reverend Deborah or Yoel, do you have some thoughts on that?
Sure, I can add to that. Well, I do think it's really important when we think about immigration. It was so helpful to hear the League of Women Voters position on immigration issues. And I agreed with much of what your position is. I think I want to like kind of highlight a few aspects of that. And one is, I think when we think about immigration policy, it's always kind of related to colonization. And we have to remember that almost all of us on this call are probably immigrants or settlers, or people who were brought here to indigenous land. And once that indigenous land was colonized, they lost control of their own migration policy. So the migration policy that we have today as a country is one that is, really the colonizers' immigration policy. And over periods of time, that has sometimes wanted immigrants here because they wanted people to work or to settle the land, and to support the expansion of that settler land. Or they've needed laborers, so they brought in whether it's contract laborers, Chinese contract laborers, Mexican contract laborers, Filipino contract laborers, or they brought in slaves and trafficked people into this country. So the immigration policy is one I think it's helpful to kind of look at in the broad view. And I think that what we're seeing today is echoes of that, of what what the history has been. Where it's sometimes yes, sometimes no. It's like, how are you useful? How are you not useful? But I think if we want to center this in the human experience and centering it to how human lives are impacted, we have to kind of, one thing I want to focus on is that right now we're in a period of exclusion and expulsion and extermination, because we are enacting deadly policies of deterrence towards immigrants at the border, on the way, escaping their home, on their way to the United States. That would be the extermination, deadly policies inside detention facilities. The expulsion is the deportations, ways we're removing people from their communities, and then the exclusions, not allowing people to really fully live in society free of fear, with full access to what it means to be a citizen of this country, to be able to vote, to be able to participate, to be able to, be engaged in this democratic society that we want. We want this country to be a place where everyone is engaged and has a voice. So I don't want to get too off track, but what I see is like this pattern of exclusion and expulsion and extermination. And so one of the pieces in Contra Costa County, I'm going to try to bring it in more local right now, has been, and my engagement, in Contra Costa County had been focused on the detention center, which was the contract that the county had with the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Department of Homeland Security, for about $5 million a year to house immigrants because they were out of status or did not have status in the West Contra Costa County Jail. And so that is a symbol of how we have decided to approach migration, which in many ways is a human issue. It's a human response to climate change. It's a human response to danger. It's a human response to move and to migrate. But our country has decided to respond to it in a way that criminalizes migration, meaning we throw all the tools of criminalization at it to try to solve it. So we try to arrest people. We try to put drones and military at the border. We try to put a wall. We try to put people in jail. So we've tried to criminalize our way out of this issue, and it hasn't worked. It hasn't really prevented migration, and it certainly hasn't worked on the human level in that it's destroyed many lives and families. So after a 7-year campaign in West Contra Costa County, that detention center closed in 2018. And I want to just share one Contra Costa story about that. In 2018, before the closure, I got a letter in my office from a man who was detained at West Contra Costa County. He came with a visa. He actually had a visa in his hand and arrived at San Francisco International Airport with his visa. And when he was going through customs, as anyone does when they come through international flights, he went through customs. They started going through his stuff. They started questioning him, probably because he was from an African country, probably because he was Black. I think if he was from, a European country, that probably wouldn't happen. And they started interrogating him, and they're like, well, if you're here as a visitor with a visitor's visa, why did you bring your nursing certificate diploma? And so they started, so after 2 hours of interrogation, he ended up on the floor in chains, his computer taken away, his watch taken away, his phone taken away. And that night he spent the night in immigration detention in West Contra Costa County. And so he wrote to me, he'd been detained for 2 weeks. And he said, you know what? My family has no idea where I'm at. Is there any way you can communicate with them on Facebook so they don't think I died in a plane crash? Because he had not even been able to communicate with them when he landed. And so that conversation, led to us trying to advocate for him, praying with him. People in Contra Costa raised money for his bond. People showed up for his court hearing. And after several months, he actually was able to be released on he had to pay $5,000. The community raised that money. He was released. A family in Contra Costa County housed him. And Justin said, I'm not done. Justin is his name, from Nigeria. He said, I'm not done. He said, what about my buddies who are left inside?
Right.
What about Erkenbot from Mongolia? What about Fernando, who's from Mexico? What about these? He's like, you can't stop with me. You have to keep going. And we're going to keep going. So I just wanted to say that this is a story of someone. Well, Justin has ended up staying in Contra Costa County. That doesn't always happen. People kind of go wherever they can find a job, or they have someone they can find housing. But 5 years later, Justin, not only through the pandemic, he worked through COVID in county hospitals, our mental health wards in a county hospital through COVID. And now in Pittsburgh, he has opened up his own home care facility for adults with disabilities. So he did not have to be this way. His whole experience of coming to the United States, to figuring out if this is a place where he could stay, if this is a place where he could contribute his gifts, it didn't have to have this whole period of detention, this 4-year nightmare of a legal case, to be able to now say, okay, I can be a permanent resident. I can open up this business. I can help people in need, with mental challenges. But he is, like, to me, an amazing success story for Contra Costa County. So our goal is we don't need to have to put people through this trauma to welcome them, to have them be part of our communities. And we have so many needs in our communities that they can help us together figure out how we can fulfill.
Wow, thank you for sharing that story. That's the kind of community building that I was talking about. And that's people like Justin are the ones that we want modeling a truly inclusive, loving society. Yoel, we haven't heard from you for a minute. What would you like to add?
I just wanted to raise 2 points to the stories that were shared. And one is that refugees and immigrants are created by material conditions in their home countries. And those material conditions, for the most part, especially in places all over the third world, were and are still today constantly created by US foreign policy that decides to go to Iran and creates destabilization, that decides to go to Indonesia and support a dictatorship, that chooses to go to all of these places all over Latin America where they overthrow democratically elected governments and put up people who would do their bidding, who would destabilize the country, make it impossible for people to live there, and then end up coming here, right? And the kind of cruel irony of it is that once these people come here as a result of what was done by this country or what was aided and abetted by this country's policies and dollars, once people arrive here, how they're dealt with is also like total disregard for human life, completely trying to criminalize people, arrest people, try to send them back to the very same conditions that this country helped create. And I just want to emphasize that point because it is not in a vacuum that people are just choosing to get up and walk and take these life-threatening journeys to bring themselves and their families that doesn't happen in a vacuum, and the context in which that happens is that there is active, both under like Republican and Democratic leadership in this country that has been consistent in its foreign policies, that constantly tries to push war, to push destabilization, or to sacrifice the masses of the people in a lot of these countries so that the people in power can do the specific bidding of what is called US foreign policy interests. So I want to highlight that point because when you talk about Afghan immigrants, when you talk about even now Ukrainian refugees or refugees from all over Latin America, Asia, and Africa, all of those things have the specific context of constant US involvement that has created these conditions. The second point that that came to me was that I looked at a reporting that said that for Afghan immigrants, when they were applying, like right after the US left and abandoned thousands of people who were interpreters and were otherwise worked with the US military over there and left them essentially to die there, people were allowed to apply for various visas that they had to pay hundreds of dollars for, which cumulatively came to millions of dollars to USCIS, that were ultimately denied or never got a response from. But then we saw a different path for, I believe it was for Ukrainian refugees and other refugees from Europe who got to apply without having to pay those. And those fees are expensive. These are like, most USCIS forms are like $1,000 or more, who didn't have to apply those fees, who had it waived and had a much faster, much more expedited immigration process to the US, where people can come here and get their work permit and all of these things on day one. And here we are dealing with immigrants from all over the world where we can't even get their work permit for 2 years. So they have to try to find work under the table, then try to find housing because they don't have credit history. They can't just apply to any housing option that's there, because nowadays you have to apply for housing, have a credit score of like 700, have like 2 months deposit and first month's rent, and et cetera, et cetera. But essentially like a set of conditions that make it very, very difficult for people to live here, to take care of their families and all of that. And there's a clear like racist disparity that happens in terms of which immigrants does this country want, despite the fact that which immigrants this country is creating by way of its involvement in the rest of the world.
Thank you, Yoel. That's a really, really key point. And I think to kind of bring us around to kind of what can we do about this and what are we doing about it? I want to note that, the current refugee and asylum system was really a response to the 1951 Refugee Convention. So the Refugee Convention is basically a treaty that the United States has signed on to, and most countries on the planet have signed on to. And it came up after the Second World War, where the world was in shambles and people had to migrate. And so there was an agreement made because of the horrors of how refugees were being treated around the world, that there are rules here, that everybody has to agree here to a set of rules of how we treat immigrants that present themselves at your border and say that, hey, I need protection. My life is in danger if I'm returned to my country. So the Refugee Convention is directly a result of political activity and a decision after World War I. And that means it's part of the law of the land. US treaties have the same effect as the US Constitution in terms of the law. But what's happening right now, not only in terms of immigrants that do get here, and you've heard stories of what we have to deal with when we get here, but the tens of thousands of people that are displaced, are migrating, and are coming here to find a better life, and are languishing at these really unlawful under international law systems at the border is really bad. So I know that there's some questions, but before we quite get to the questions, I just wanted to make sure that we kind of bring it back to a positive frame, because we've talked about a lot of the problems, but there is so much good work going on about this. And I really feel like myself personally, as an immigrant, I feel like it's part of my way of belonging here in the United States as an American, is to address these issues and to act as a bridge between immigrants and non-immigrants, to show that really immigrants are some of the bravest, most resourceful, loving, family-oriented people that I've ever met. And so I just want to say that these are exactly the kind of people that I want to be in community with. And so before we get to questions, what are ways in which people in our audience that want to kind of tap in or take action, what are some thoughts or a thought from each of our panelists about what are ways that folks can tap in? And if there's any final burning thoughts that any of the panelists want to kind of tack on, this is a good time to do it. So unfortunately, I had some tech problems, so I'm on my phone, so I can't see the rest of the panelists. So any of you just jump in with some ways that folks can tap in.
Yeah, I'm happy to kick us off here. And I mean, I just kind of want to really reiterate Yoel's point that, like, if we could stay in our homes, we would stay there. You know, like I constantly walk around with a lot of grief, feeling like I don't have a home, you know, and that I've had to figure out how I find home within people, because I don't have that luxury of having a physical home.
Yeah.
Whether it's, you know, I'm a DACA recipient, and so whether it's like, I don't know if my work permit's going to get renewed next. I don't even know if DACA is going to exist, you know, and so that constantly lingers over me. And I think that almost feels like a punishment in itself, is not having the privilege of being able to plan 5 years ahead of me. You know, I work in the increments of how the system has structured me to think about it. And I just want to emphasize that, because I think when we think about, well, they got a visa, like they're fine, you know, or their order of deportation got stopped, they're fine. And it's like, it's not fine. You know, we're constantly being surveilled and constantly being put in situations that really limit our ability to actually be able to thrive in this country. But on the uplifting note, you know, I do want to make an invitation to folks that everyone here who is present has an opportunity to shift the narrative of people's perceptions of who are immigrant communities that are deserving, or, you know, counter the narratives of who isn't deserving, because really that's all a construct. Like I mentioned, no one, and even if folks did choose to leave their home, you know, I hear these narratives about, you know, people are coming here to steal people's jobs, you know, people are coming here and, you know, bringing drugs, or people are coming here and, you know, living lawlessness, you know, hearing all these narratives when that's actually not the accurate story. And I think all of us here are people who are part of spaces where you probably hear those narratives. And I just make an invitation to folks on what would it look like for you to really center the dignity of all people, that everyone should have the right to move, everyone should have a right to have a home, everyone should have a right to be seen as who they are. And narratives is so important because they inform policies. I mean, look at the Trump administration, you know, and how that gave a trickle down effect to localities. And, you know, I also want to encourage people to pay close attention to how the migrant system is mirroring the criminal legal system, and how much entrenched there is this culture around punishment, around carceral solutions. And we cannot unsee that. And how do we work at shifting the ways that we look at you know, folks who are arriving into this country. I know we're going to get into the question portion, but you know, I did peek there that it's just like, you know, what is the solution? And I think what all of us have a role to play, and I hope that we all really see that. And I know we'll get to some of those responses. And yeah, so you know, I really want to challenge folks to think of, you know, how could you challenge the narratives, whether it's when you're having dinner, those uncomfortable, you know, Thanksgiving dinners, you know, you have with your families, or you know, whatever spaces you're part of, is really challenging the narratives and the misconceptions people have of migrant communities.
Thanks, Sandy. Yeah, I mean, I think that's one piece that everybody can do right now, and not just counter those narratives, but be aware of them, right? When you're seeing these news stories, don't take the headlines for what they seem like. Kind of look at who stands to gain and what do they stand to gain when they're using the immigration issues and the real life issues that are facing immigrants that are in this country, but also migrants that are making these perilous journeys to find safety for their families. Why is there so much vitriol? What do people have to gain? What is it about this that is being used as a distraction? I think that's that narrative piece, and that critical thinking is really key. What about some practical ways to tap in? I mean, one thing I want to say is on that point of criminalization is, you know, there's a really good bill pending right now, AB 1306, passed the Assembly and House. It's called the HOME Act. It's at the governor's desk right now. So one of the things that you'll get in the resource guide is some connections with some organizations that do that work on this stuff. And so encouraging Governor Newsom to sign the HOME Act, which prevents double punishment of immigrants who are incarcerated and have already served their time and have been found to be eligible to be reunited into the community and be reunited with their families, to make sure that they're not robbed of that opportunity to come home once they've served their time, simply based on the place that they were born, because that's wrong. And so that's one place that you can do some traditional kind of legislative advocacy. But what about other ways to tap in on a more personal level? You do a lot of work with newcomers. What do you think are some ways that folks can tap in?
Yeah, I mean, the most common ones are the ones that everyone generally also struggles with: finding housing so you can have a way to be stabilized, and then finding employment, and then, you know, tapping into existing social services, like being able to apply for benefits, healthcare, etc. And I think concretely, if, you know, people are able to connect with nonprofits who serve like immigrants, newcomers, and are able to either provide housing or, you know, provide jobs or help them, even if people are taking like an hour and a half out of their day to help people navigate how to apply for your health benefits, how to enroll in like Medicare or Medi-Cal or any sort of like healthcare services, how to find housing, giving people rides even so that they can look for jobs, right? I think that, like, you know, if people are able to volunteer to help one or two immigrants with the concrete things that they need for, like, you know, 3 to 6 months until they can get a job, they can get housing, they could kind of get into the basic benefits that they're allowed to have, that makes a huge difference for like 2 reasons. One, it like stabilizes the individual and whoever the individual supports, like their siblings, their children, their spouses, etc. And then 2, it helps them, like, once they know how the system works, that one person that you helped is going to go and like help 10 other people to do the same thing that he or she did, because they know how to do it, or they'll bring them to you so you can show them how to do it. So the multiplier effect of like helping one person at a time is massive, because you can help like 2 people in 1 year or 3 people in 1 year, like all the way through. The following year, there's going to be like 90 other people who are affected by each of them. So it really like pays off massively when we just take the time to do it, with like 1 or 2 people. If you can do it with like 10 people at a time, that's great. But, you know, it's hard with everyone's commitments. but taking one or two people and doing it well and connecting them to kind of everything pays off massively. And I think it's a concrete way people can get both play a supportive role, but also this is how we all learned how terrible all the systems we have are, because they're hard to navigate. They're not easy, even when you fully understand English and you can follow stuff and you can like apply to all the right things. It's still really difficult. But you only learn how difficult it is when you're actually trying to help someone how to do it. So it's a way to both like learn how the system works and also to have like real positive, like long-lasting impact.
Mhm. That's great. And I know there was a question in the chat of like, how do you recommend that people tap into that? Are there particular organizations that you want to shout out right now, or could folks contact you to get put in touch? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, feel free. I mostly work in the East Bay, so I think Ali probably knows all the Contra Costa organizations and he can share those. But the Oakland kind of Bay Area organizations, some of the ones I work with, I can put in the chat and share with, or feel free to email me and I'll connect you to folks.
Great. Reverend Deborah.
Yes, I want to just add, like, I think that what's really key is empathy and understanding. And I'm pretty sure people are crossing paths with immigrants all over. And I think taking the time to really think about how am I deepening my understanding and trying to have more empathy and to really accompany people. Our organization, the Interfaith Movement for Human Integrity, we do organize accompaniment teams. So teams of people who can help walk with someone who doesn't have a family member, doesn't have a guide, there's no handbook, but help accompany someone who's new to this country, seeking asylum or newly released from detention, seeking protection, but they're just trying to get their feet on the ground. So to walk with them, to help them figure out how to get their kids in school, how to ride the bus, how to look for a job, how to do all these things, how to show up for immigration court so you don't get deported for not showing up, how to read the paperwork. And most of our volunteers are not immigrants, so they've never seen this stuff before, but they can read English. So it's a lot easier. And I think the benefit of it, as Yoel mentioned, is to start to really understand what our immigration system really is for people. And if you haven't been through it, you have no idea. And so I think this is our tax dollars. These are the system that we voted in. And so we should take responsibility by knowing what it is and knowing its impact on people. So if you're interested in accompanying a person or a family or hosting them, a housing host, that's our organization. We're turning people away and we're like, well, just wait till we find some new accompaniers or a new housing host. So we would love to have more volunteers and supporting in that work.
I think that's a beautiful, beautiful way for people to tap in. And I think that the other thing that I'll add to that is there's going to be a kind of another conversation with the League of Women Voters early next year, kind of more focused on the new deportation processing center or so-called immigration court that's coming to Contra Costa County in downtown Concord in the heart of the Monument Corridor, which is a heavily immigrant populated area. And one of the things that I think will emerge from that is opportunities not only for accompaniment through all of the things that Reverend Deborah and Yoel mentioned, but also court watch, right? The best way to really see hands-on in some ways how these asylum cases are playing out and what's going on is to actually go to the new immigration court that they're going to build and go in there, sit down, watch how it's working and how it's not working and pay attention to all of that and get involved. So I just wanted to name that stuff, but I know we've gone a little bit over and we want to address questions. As I mentioned earlier, I am having public defender life tech problems because our computer system went down So I'm on my phone, so it's difficult for me to read the chat. So were there questions? I know there's been questions coming through. Can any of my co-panelists who see a question that they wanted to address just kind of like pick one, and then I will go through and look at some as well to see if there's legal ones that I should be chiming in on.
I'd like to take one that talks about, you know, oh, the immigration detention system isn't working. What's our vision for that? I do want to share our vision. I mean, our vision is that immigration detention does not exist. It actually doesn't need to exist at all. People are able to go to court, to show up for court, to like go through their legal proceedings without having to be detained that whole time, which sometimes takes up to 4, you know, I've seen people have been detained for 4 years, sometimes more. There's no reason why. So that's not the reason. And so we're really questioning why immigration detention even exists. And it shouldn't. And I want to proudly say, you know, and Sandy has been part of this, and Yoel's been part of this too, that, you know, 10 years ago, there were 12 immigration detention centers in California, and now there are 6. And we're hoping that number continues to go down. It's part of national efforts in states all across the country to close down immigration detention centers because they don't need to exist. They are part of this idea of deterrence and making people's lives so miserable that they will hopefully not come. But we know that the forces that are causing people to come, and it's not the coyotes, it's not the traffickers that are making people come. People would not be coming and leaving all of that if there was not, you know, real push factors for them. So that's part of our vision, no immigration detention. The other thing is that all the billions of dollars of our tax dollars that we're using to militarize the border and to support detention and deportation, that so many more needs that money could be used for in terms of housing and the environment and healthcare. And when we think about like, oh, people are taking our limited resources, well, are our resources limited, or are our resources being used for other things that actually, if they were distributed differently and we weren't spending billions of dollars on these other things, but on human needs, actually, we would have much more of an economy of abundance.
Thank you, Reverend Deborah. I'll jump in real quick and answer or try to address, you know, well, actually, I was hoping that maybe Sandy could touch on this, but there was a question about the mental health impacts of all of the uncertainty around being an immigrant in limbo in the system. And I know, Sandy, you had touched on that, so I imagine that was addressed partially to you. You know, there's not only mental health impacts, but also health impacts as well. And so, Sandy, do you have some thoughts to share on those aspects and how real that is?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. That's also the question that I wanted to address. You know, I think we're really lucky in California that through some actually efforts I was part of, there's now been an expansion of health access, but it's on a very limited scope. And so I definitely invite you to take a look at some of the initiatives that folks are leading statewide in order to expand the access to healthcare. And there's also ways that you could do that locally. At the local county level, there's something that's called emergency scope. And emergency scope is basically a pot of money that is up to the discretion of the county on how to use it. And so, you know, when if you feel called to continue to push on your board of supervisors to expand services and resources for undocumented communities. I mean, here in Alameda County, we have a program that is not limited to folks who have, you know, a status. You know, anyone can access services. And so thinking about like, what would that look like in Contra Costa? I also had the privilege of, for the past now 2 years, I've been running a small cohort called the Right to Heal Project across detention centers, where I've led a cohort of folks to work on how they can heal while in detention center, and what does it look like for them to unlayer all of their trauma and experiences, and how to find a place of empowerment and self-fulfillment. And so that program has paused for the time being, but I say that to say that letter writing is so important to people in detention center. Sending money to people's commissary, like it really goes a long way. And I would do this activity with folks through the program where I would make a wellness packets, and it's anything from like word searches to like prompts. And it really goes a long way, because as Deb shared, you know, these facilities are created so that it forces you to sign your voluntary removal. Like that is the goal, to isolate you, to abuse you, to, you know, take away all of your autonomy in order for you to sign that paper saying you want to leave. They want to stop you from being able to fight. And so I encourage folks to connect with Interfaith for Human Integrity, to Pangea Legal Services, Centro Legal de la Raza, the Dignity Not Detention Network, ICE out of California, Asian Prisoner Support Committee, Interfaith for Inland Empire Coalition. I was going to say Interfaith for Human Integrity, but also Deb's organization, and just letter write. It just literally goes a long way, and it keeps fueling people's will to fight the removal proceedings. So yeah.
Thanks, Sandy. I saw one question in the chat. I thought it was a really, really good one about, you know, that part of what we're saying here is to make an effort to get to understand immigrants and to connect with immigrants. But that some people have been told, well, don't ask an immigrant where they're from. Like, don't just come out and say, hey, where are you from? And that, so that people feel uncomfortable sometimes with that. And you know, I'm just speaking for myself right now about this issue, and I'd love to hear what other panelists think. But I think that people are not one identity, right? So my immigrantness is a big part of who I am, but it's not all of who I am, right? And when I'm first meeting somebody, if the first question out of their mouth is, where are you from, right? As someone that's experienced racism, and you know, I don't know this person yet, like it might not get us off on the right foot, because first of all, I might not be ready to share that with you. Second of all, I might be afraid that you have an issue with people from Iran, or things like that. So that's not to say, though, that the correct answer is when you see somebody that you think might be an immigrant, like turn the other way and don't talk to them, right? The idea is still engage, still connect. Ask me my name, ask me what I'm interested in, ask me where, like, what I do, all of that stuff. And once you make that human connection, then at that point, when you're in the flow of a conversation, right, you can start to tease out whether or not, like, being an immigrant is a big part of my identity. Most likely, I'm going to bring it up once we get to know each other pretty early on, just period, because it is a part of my identity. So I just want to encourage, I want to thank the person that asked that question for being brave and asking that question. And I want to say that I'm somebody that, because I struggle with alienation and belonging, I want to talk about things with people that don't have a shared experience with me. And so I think take care with not putting somebody into a box and being like, oh, there's an immigrant, I want to get to know them because I want to be good about immigrants, right? Like, it's not a human way to really interact. But when you get to know somebody, at least me, I'm speaking for myself, as long as it doesn't feel like you are reducing my identity to my immigrantness or my immigrant status or something like that, but that you're trying to get to know me and understand me better, that's the condition in which you will get to understand me and know me better, and then we'll talk about things. And all immigrants are different. Some people might not be comfortable talking about that early on, and you'll need to follow their cues and give some space, but still be in relationship and build that relationship, and then the rest will come in time. So I just wanted to mention that for that question. I think there was also a question about the border. I don't know, Yoel, I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you have an answer on that, I do have a particular thing about the border, which is what's going on right now with the border, in my view, is just simply illegal in terms of international law. We signed that. We learned some really hard lessons after 2 world wars that, you know what, when people are coming and showing up at your border and asking for help, we're all going to agree that we're going to at least give that person some process, right? That we're going to let them in. We're going to give them the protection as we figure out what's going on with them and whether or not they qualify for the protections that all of these countries, like it's over 100 something countries in the world, have agreed to, including the United States. What's happening with the border policies of the past 2 administrations is simply refusing to follow international law about how we're supposed to deal with asylum seekers. The situation at the border is asylum seekers lawfully protecting themselves and following the rules of what is expected to come and present yourself at the border and say, I need protection. What's supposed to happen is that they let you in, they begin the process, and then you get connected with some services, and then the process goes through there and you get a work permit while your case is pending. That's how it's supposed to work, and that's how it worked before the border was politicized the way it is. And so I just want to say that the answer to one of the big issues at the border, which is what do we do with the people that are presenting themselves and seeking asylum, is simple. Follow international law, follow the Refugee Convention, let people in.
I want to just add, there was a question early on about a follow-up to the story that I shared about the person, and it relates to your story, Ali. So the person who I talked about, who came to SFO, he did what he was supposed to do, which is to show up at a lawful port of entry at like the airport is one, the border is another, and to ask for asylum. So but the only way he could get here, he could either go the long way, which if you're coming from Nigeria, you have to somehow get to this other continent and come all the way up through Mexico and get to the US and risk your life. So there's people doing that at the border. He was able to get a tourist visa to come to ask for asylum in an airport. And when they find out he was asking for asylum, that's when they detained him. So our policy in response to people, doing this the right way, in terms of international law, is then to throw them into immigration detention. So I just wanted to follow up that piece. And I think there's so much that, it's not just one little fix. We have to kind of re-envision the whole thing. And that has to do with what Yoel was talking about root causes. Like we really have to address the militarization all over the world. We have to address climate. Those are two key primary drivers that are happening to migration. We have to address the inequity between countries. You can't have a country where you could make, where you can work for a year and make what you can make in a month in this country, and then expect people not to move. Like you cannot have that kind of global inequality. So we have to address those things like in the long term and in the big picture. And then we have to stop doing the things that are really killing people and creating lifelong trauma.
Yes, that's such an important point, Deb. I think I really feel like the issues that we're talking about, we've talked a lot about kind of stories and the human elements of this, because I think that's what's getting lost, right? And that goes back to what we talked about debunking these narratives that are coming out. It's only going to get spicier in the news as the powers that be literally use immigrants as a political football. Like they're literally putting people on buses and like throwing them around and putting them in these terrible, terrible positions to use them in the power struggles between the major parties or whatever, however you want to think of what the US politics are, we as immigrants are being used as a prop. We're being used as a prop, and it's really, really dehumanizing, and there's lives and families on the line. And so when you see these narratives, what we ask you to do is dig deeper, look at it from a human lens, get involved so that you meet people that are going through this system. Some of these suggestions that were made, like, you know, and it's not just the immigration system. It's what is the experience of an immigrant that's trying to do all of these other things that we all have to do, put their kids in school, get medical care, you know, all of these things are stacked, unfortunately, against immigrants. Whereas the thing to debunk is this myth that immigrants are coming to take anything away from anybody that's here. We're not. We come in peace. We really do. We're here. We want to work. We want to have a better life for our families, just like everybody else. And immigrants, especially in California, are really a major, major part of what makes this state my home and the place that I call home. And so I feel like the issue of belonging is at the center of this in a very real way. And in Contra Costa County, for example, you know, over 25% of the population of Contra Costa County are immigrants, are foreign born. Okay. So this isn't like a small population we're talking about. And many of the people in the audience might not realize how many of their neighbors, the people they run across, have these deep, rich immigrant stories that have only been touched on by the four of us as kind of a proxy for the richness and the strength of what immigrants are dealing with and what migrants are dealing with on a day-to-day basis, both as they risk their lives to find a better life, hopefully here in this country, and then what they go through when they get here and the systems dehumanize them, criminalize them, and use them as a political football instead of meeting the very human needs and helping us integrate into a rich and diverse California and Contra Costa County that we can all be proud of. And I see that there's a question regarding the deportation center. So I know I just spoke. I don't know if anybody else wants to touch on that, but I know I'm probably, does anybody want to talk about the new deportation processing center coming to Concord?
I think you're the best one, Ali.
Okay. Well, so that's going to be the topic, the teaser. This is a perfect setup. Thank you for whomever asked that question. We're going to go really more in depth into that at a future League of Women Voters panel in March, I believe. That new deportation processing center is set to open in February. They've already signed the lease to the Gateway Center in Concord. And what's happening right now is we're all getting together and figuring out the game plan. So the legal service providers, the accompaniment organizations, the rapid response networks, the immigrant rights advocates are going to be getting together and having a convening to really figure out if they're going to build a large, there's going to be at least 20 new courtrooms. So that means that they can process many, many more deportations. That if this place is going to open, what can we do to make sure that it has our Contra Costa values, it has our California values, it has our human values that we've discussed today? How can we ensure that the people that are processed through that facility have access to due process? Because people don't know. That's why I'm encouraging Court Watch. People don't know that in immigration court, you don't have the right to the government to pay for an attorney for you if you can't afford one. So that means most of these asylum seekers, most of which don't even speak English, are left to fend for themselves in this really complex system. And so this new deportation center processing center is going to be a big deal. And we want to ensure that if it's coming to our community, we need a community response that welcomes those that are those community members of ours that are being processed there. And so that's where there's going to be a lot of ways to tap in for accompaniment, court watching, volunteering, and so forth. And so, you know, and if we do it right, hopefully we can get some good results. You know, I think I'll say I run a program called Stand Together Contra Costa. And that's a program that I'm very proud to be a part of, that's run by the County of Contra Costa. We partner with nonprofits to fill this gap because the federal government doesn't provide immigrants who can't afford an attorney when they're going through these deportation proceedings. Contra Costa County has decided to show that they stand together with immigrants. And so we have immigration lawyers, myself and on my staff, that are going to be able to represent people in these cases. And what we find is that when immigrants are actually represented, and especially when they're given good representation, their outcomes are so much better. Somebody that goes into an asylum case without an attorney tends to win about less than 30% of the time. Whereas nationally, if you do have an attorney in an asylum case, you win over 70% of the time. And right now, what's going on with the influx of asylum seekers is my program right now, I'm really proud of this number. We have won so far 93% of our cases. And that's because these people that are fleeing for their lives aren't here to try to steal jobs or lie and get one over. They are fleeing for their lives. And that's why 93% of the time we're winning people their right to detach from this oppressive system and get integrated into our community life. So I just wanted to say that. And with that, I want to thank the League of Women Voters for having us today and turn it back over to our gracious hosts. I'm sorry if we went long.
Thank you, Ali, for all of that wonderful information. On behalf of the Contra Costa County Library, the League of Women Voters Diablo Valley, the League of Women Voters West Contra Costa County, and CCTV, I want to extend a genuine thank you to each of the panelists for sharing their time with us today and for giving us such an informative and timely conversation about the realities of immigration. And also a big thank you to Pamela Perales, our Spanish interpreter, for all of her work today. Ali, and this is his contact and the name of his organization that he founded. Thank you, Reverend Deborah Lee. Many of you were trying to catch up on what was the name of her organization, and you have the site there. Yoel, thank you so much for being here today, and Sandy for all of the work that you do and what you shared with us. I also want to thank each of you for joining and for asking important questions today. This community conversation, what is the reality of immigration, is being rebroadcast on CCTV on the following days and times. Community conversations, what is the reality of immigration, will be on the YouTube channels of the League of Women Voters Diablo Valley and the Contra Costa County Library. Please save the date for our next community conversation on October 19th at 4 o'clock. Income and wealth inequality, pathways to balancing scales. Community conversations programs are a partnership between the Contra Costa County Library, the League of Women Voters Diablo Valley, League of Women Voters West Contra Costa County, and CCTV. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization encouraging informed and active participation in government. The League never endorses or opposes candidates or political parties. We influence public policy through education and advocacy. We invite everyone to join the League and support the work we do at lwvc.org/join. Thank you so much. Have a great evening.